This is a short story that I really liked. It was one of the first HFY stories that I ever read, actually. It was in a big collection, just an image dump, I think, on Imager, and this was one of the stories that was in it. So this is called Level With Me. Level with me. The orb clicked in response. I maintain my present orientation, Commander. No, the commander started, then stopped. His expression softened with something approaching sympathy. He spoke again, saying, I mean, tell me the situation as it is. Don't sugarcoat. He caught himself this time. Don't leave anything out. The orb blinked and nodded, shaking its eye case up and down. Our position at Veen is unstable. The aggressors have taken the outer system and demand that the inner system be surrendered. They are gathering fleet assets. We cannot withstand them even now, but they do not attack. It was the commander's turn to nod. What about us? The combined task force, the orb said, if it moves to Veen at best speed, will reach the system within 15 hours. There is no closer force. It is our prediction that the aggressors will proceed to invade the inner system before we reach Veen. The commander mulled this over for a moment and sat back at his desk. But we'll be able to save the system if we move now. The orb shook its eye case the other way. No, the combined task force will be insufficient. The aggressors will take the inner system regardless of resistance. For a time, the room was silent. The commander closed his eyes and let his head hang down, thinking about what it would mean to commit the task force to action, and about what would happen if he chose to stand off. We have a pact with you, he said, still leaning against the desk, head still down. We make for Veen. Tell your people to expect us. The orb nodded once more and departed. The commander began to see faces. These he would never see again, for Veen would claim them. He opened his eyes and opened a fleet-wide channel to announce a course change. 12 hours later, the command staff stood in a circle around the holoset aboard the bridge of the flagship, watching the sensor data pour in. The task force had pushed all engines beyond safety limits, damaging them irreparably, but cutting travel time by more than an hour. The lead vessels were now close enough to Veen to access the system's sensor network, and the information they were collecting was now being shared throughout the fleet. The situation was entirely hopeless. The aggressors had begun their attack 7 hours ago, and were now encroaching upon the second planet, the final fortress of Veen. Friendly forces had been decimated, and were now making their last stand around that world, fighting to their last breath against a dozen fleets, each more than 20 times their own tonnage. The orb, now hovering over the holoset, reported that its people were ready for the arrival of the combined task force. A clock within the holoset had begun counting down, and reversion to real space was expected in 6 minutes. It took 2 minutes for the command staff to finalize their defense plans. The commander made his final address before reversion 3 minutes later. The enemy is present in overwhelming numbers, which will just make the losses we are about to inflict all the more embarrassing. We will bleed them so badly they will execute their officers for incompetence. We're all the cavalry there is, so make the charge count. Don't hold anything back. All craft, prepare for combat. All 68 ships of the combined task force reverted at the same time, punching a hole in space so wide that, for a brief moment, it blotted out the sun. In that moment, every ship fired everything. The light of their main guns burned through a squadron of capital ships, caught with their shields facing the wrong way. Before the nearest aggressor fleet could reorient itself, the combined task force had brought down twice its mass in enemy metal. The element of surprise was quickly spent. The aggressors turned their ships to face this new threat, shifting a full 3 fleets out of position to match a force lesser than theirs by far. The defenders of Veen took this opportunity to renew their attack, and the sky above the second world brightened once again with the lights of battle. The flagship shuddered as it lost its port-side missile pod. All around it, the warships of the combined task force were breaking apart, their well-built hulls no match for the immense volume of fire raining down upon them. The commander stood and saluted them, closing his eyes one last time as his own ship was smashed to ruin. Behind him, the orb-shaped emissary backed itself into an alcove and anchored itself there, just as the shields failed completely. Vine's defenders were extinguished 37 minutes later. All that remained of the combined task force were expanding clouds of gas and wreckage, reduced to small pieces by the aggressors to ensure no survivors. But the emissary anchored to the alcove was still there, though the structure it was attached to had long since ceased to be part of the bridge. When Vine was retaken over 100 days later, the emissary was recovered, its beacon still broadcasting weekly. Its memory was made part of public record. Parts of it were played at the signing of the treaty with humanity, formally bringing the two empires together in unity. The ambassador told those gathered the full story of the Battle of Vine. In 200 seconds, a meager 68 ships destroyed or crippled 4 times their number of enemy vessels, including 3 battlecruisers and a command carrier, each of those far outmassing the human flagship. The combined task force perished in its entirety, but it left 3 fleets in disarray and, by drawing these away from the defenders, magnified their effectiveness against the remaining ships. As was their custom, the aggressors left the corpses of their dishonored dead floating around one of their gutted ships. Among them were hundreds of high-ranking officers, including an admiral, executed for incompetence. Vine maintains its own special fleet unit, numbering 68 ships. The flagship, at the request of the emissary, was christened Level With Me. I always liked this one. It's a good story. Short, sweet, to the point. All killer, no filler. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I think it's just a great story, and I will see you guys in the next one. All right. Bye. Holy shit, this dog. He's just back there, just shuffling around.